and hello again, and here we see three of my watches. On the left there you see my Tag Heuer chronograph. In the middle there's my Omega Speedmaster First Unreading Space, or FOIS for short, and on the right there's my Zenith El Primero Pilot, also a chronograph of course. And the reason I've got them here is because each one is somewhat different in its movement in terms of its beat rate, which is something I want to talk about today. And the first one I want to talk about is this Omega Speedmaster. It's got the same movement in it as the standard Omega Speedmaster Professional, that is to say the 1861 movement. And what surprised me when I first got it was how slow the movement was. If you listen to it ticking, it sounds like a sort of tractor going tick, 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 rather than the higher beat movements I'm used to. And in fact it does beat at only 21,600 RPM, that is to say beats per hour. Now you can divide that by 3,600, which gets you the hertz, and in this case of course that gets us 6 hertz, i.e. 6 beats per second, which is pretty slow these days because the sort of industry standard has become a little bit more than that at 8 hertz, such as for example this Tag Heuer chronograph here, which runs at 8 hertz or 28800 per hour. Now the sun's starting to set, so it might be a bit tricky with all the shadows and so on, but yeah, this runs at 28,800 beats per hour or 8 hertz. Whereas of course the El Primero is famous for its high beat rate, and the El Primero here runs at, oops, bit of a shadow there, and that runs at 36,000 per hour or 10 hertz, which is about as high as you get in mainstream watches. There are a few out there which have higher beat rates, but not many. Okay, so let's bring these into sunlight a little bit. The sun's getting quite low now, it's gone 6 o'clock, so hopefully you can see these watches okay. Now the point is that the higher beat rate we have, in theory, the more accurate a watch can be. And obviously that's why, for example, Zenith developed their El Primero back in '69 to run at such a high beat rate. But there are issues with that in terms of the power reserve unwinds itself a bit quicker, and of course it's more complicated. In theory the movement can wear out quicker, and at the time the oils weren't that good to keep this thing running for like decades and decades and decades without any work. But since then of course things have improved, and in fact now the Zenith El Primero can run for pretty much the same amount of time between services as just about anything else. And so before we lose the sunlight here, I've started each of the chronographs running, and I want to just get them all together and so we can compare each one and see if that high beat rate or slow beat rate makes a big difference to the way the seconds hand sweeps around the dial. And looking at it now, actually I think it does. The slower movement here on the Omega at just 6 hertz is clearly very different from the high beat movement at 10 hertz of the Zenith, with the Tag Heuer being somewhere in the middle. It's actually a lot easier to see if we concentrate on these two here. Yeah, the Zenith definitely has a much smoother sweep as that seconds hand goes around the dial, whereas the Omega is much more sort of staggered stop start, with the Tag being somewhere in the middle as expected. So yeah, I've actually never done that before in terms of comparing them in this way, but certainly you can tell a difference. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I wouldn't like to say, but certainly I'm a real fan of the Zenith El Primero movements, and I do like high beat movements, so for me the Zenith wins every time. Anyway, thanks for watching and cheers.